This is the secret way into a hospital village in the heart of Gabon's virgin forest. It has to be concealed because today in Gabon, the practice of traditional medicine is forbidden. The government has decided that medical care should be of the Western variety. But the natives are opposed to this and are determined to preserve their own form of medicine. Only the sick and their relatives who have come with them to look after them and help in their treatment live in this hospital village of Egolani. Kuranaji Winga has a considerable reputation as a healer. He knows all the potions and remedies, but doesn't exaggerate either their importance or their potency. As he makes clear at the outset, the whole group must participate in the cure.
What is it we are going to do together? Treat and heal a sick man.
Each gesture has a symbolic significance, which is understood by all, so that the whole group, and not just the patient, participate in the treatment, because basically its success depends on them. The medicine man can only help a person get rid of his symptoms. A cure is a double restoration. The restoration of the harmony within a person and between him and his environment, because the root cause of the trouble is a breakdown in this harmony. These are the terms the Africans themselves use to describe the problem. This woman has been cured, and the medicine man is about to announce this publicly. The ritual describes how ill she was, how she recovered, became her former self, and regained contact with her environment. At this moment, the medicine man is merely performing a ceremony in celebration of this newfound harmony. His is a social function which he can only exercise with the help of the group. It is exactly the opposite of what the term witch doctor implies to a Westerner. Traditional African medicine is a product of traditional African society, a society which did not delegate its responsibilities. Dakar, the capital of Senegal, which was one of the oldest French colonies in Africa. The whites built this city for themselves. Constantly victims of tropical disease, they imported their own doctors. During the colonial period, everything was organized by the colonial power, for the colonizers and in relation to their form of society. Independence meant a new form of government and a new structure of authority. Public health became the responsibility of the new government, which opted in favor of Western-style scientific medicine. A pharmacy in Dakar, a remedy or a whole series of remedies for every complaint. The sick have become consumers not only of medical care, but also of medical products. The vast array of pharmaceutical products available today is not due to their different healing properties, but rather evidence of the fact that pharmaceuticals is one of the most profitable sectors in the economy. But here, all these products are imported. It means a heavy expense for the country, and for the sick too, who are bombarded by advertising telling them of the magical properties of the white man's medicine, which not only tends to discourage efforts in the area of hygiene and preventive medicine, but also effectively stifles any reaction against the living conditions which cause this illness. There's a world of difference between this hospital in Dakar and Egolani. These doctors have decided to x-ray the brain of this mental patient. He's become just another body on the slab. This kind of operation requires increasingly sophisticated and expensive equipment, and so the big names in surgery increasingly tend to handle only the special cases. Spectacular, high-cost operations performed on a few have replaced less spectacular, low-cost care for the masses. The cost of the equipment and the fees paid to specialists are a heavy burden on a country's health budget. Can a poor society afford this kind of medical care?
Well, it won't.
The medicine man in Senegal, rather like the old-style European country doctor, is part of the village community. What he earns is proportionate to what his patients can pay. In this case, 2 bottles of wine.
Indolo dia sadi.
Iko ni kura fitiro la emma.
Fitiro la emma.
Kabrabe mala fitiro la.
Sometimes this may be merely a token payment, the skull of a goat or some other animal. The medicine man knows what remedies there are. There's no human society which hasn't learned how to make use of the plants and animals in its own natural environment for the treatment of disease. In fact, the products sold in a pharmacy are, more often than not, merely a chemical formulation of elements which at one time were extracted from plants growing in the countryside. The patient is complaining of stomach pains, which he's had for several days. Enough said. The medicine man knows what he needs and prescribes a root which he has first of all to boil in water and then drink the juice. What is important is that he should take just the right amount. Europeans who have lived for many years in Africa do not hesitate to consult the local native doctor. What was your reason for consulting this medicine man?
I came to see him because I had had hepatitis and I had heard that he had a good cure for this.
You were treated by a European doctor first of all.
Yes, I was treated by a European doctor, but I still wasn't well. I was eating nothing and taking tonics, but this was not having any effect. Then one day, a nurse I know at the hospital said to me, "I'll take you to see this medicine man who is well known in Dakar, and he'll give you something." So I came here, and this fellow took a look at my eyes to see if I had jaundice, and gave me some roots which I had to soak in some water and then drink the juice.
Et à partir de ce moment-là, presque du jour au lendemain, j'ai recommencé à manger et je me suis sentie beaucoup mieux.
And then, within 24 hours, I was eating again and felt a lot better. The treatment lasted 3 weeks.
The somewhat noisy payment for medical services, a cockerel who is on his way to the poulterers. But let's get back to Egalani, far from any European civilization, where we can get a better idea of some of the fundamental aspects of African medicine. Kuranaji Winga allowed us to interview him. Here you don't need a degree to practice medicine. It's a group which decides whether you are fit to become a healer. In my case, I was a patient before becoming a medicine man. I had a pain in my side. I was treated by Ogula Virie, and he cured me. I stayed on and worked for him, and for a long time I was known as Old Pain in the Side. Then one day, Ogula Virie said to me, "In return for all the work you've done, I'm going to teach you to be a healer, because you have the ability." He taught me how to use the forest plants and trees, and then one day he unveiled my eyes so that I could see illness. From that day, I have been able to look at a resin torch and see the patient and his complaint through it. In Europe, the patient would need to be x-rayed. You know, we're not ashamed to admit that we have to make music, dance and sing whilst we look at the torch to discover what the illness is. It probably seems ridiculous to you, but that's the way we've always done it. This is the way we find out whether the root of the trouble is in the throat, chest, stomach or intestine. Depending on the nature of the illness, whilst dancing, I'm thinking of what bark I will need to get tomorrow or what plant I could use. But there's one thing the Europeans do not treat, probably because they're not aware of it, and that is the night cord. This is why a patient, even if he has been given the best European medical attention, is never completely cured. He has kept the night cord which is tying him to his illness. We African healers are able to cut this night cord. I don't know whether Europeans understand what it means to sacrifice oneself. We have to devote ourselves entirely to the dance with every particle of our being and for several nights in a row in order to effect a cure. I don't know how to treat cancer because this is a disease which we don't have. But I know how to treat PV, which is when someone has difficulty in breathing. I can calm a nervous person or the insane. I know what plants will cure gonorrhea, but I don't know how to treat elephantiasis. I can cure diseases of the womb and ailments of the stomach and intestines, but not a strangulated hernia. However, I know what you have to drink in order to stop a hernia becoming strangulated. It sometimes happens that a person has an evil spell cast on him. I know how to rid him of this. Once the patient is cured, I perform the gestures which call upon his head the protection of our ancestors. It is good that the Europeans came and taught us things we knew nothing about. But it is not good that we should place our faith entirely in this, abandoning our own knowledge and our own traditions, because these come from our ancestors and are part of what we are. In Western countries, a hospital patient is separated from his social group and given a number. This separation is a traumatic experience, and in the case of a newborn baby, it can be a cause of death. European medicine is beginning to realize this. In its desire to emulate our progress, must Africa first of all adopt methods which we now regard as questionable? A nurse, however competent, is not and cannot be a mother for every child in a ward, particularly in Africa, where from birth a baby lives in constant physical contact with its mother. The patient, who in the African form of collectivist society would be given individual attention, is considered in modern individualistic society as no more than an item for repair. What a paradox. Such repairs are becoming increasingly expensive. Hospitals are overcrowded. 2 patients to a bed. Lamborghini, the hospital village created by Albert Schweitzer, one of the rare attempts to adapt Western medicine to the African environment. Dr. Schweitzer designed his hospital like a village where the patient could live with his family. Since he considered it important not to disrupt the biological equilibrium between man and his environment, he forbade the use of DDT, refusing to turn his hospital into a sterilized area in sharp contrast to what the patient would find on his return home. He wanted a hospital suited to the patients and not to the doctors. The hospital's present head surgeon, Dr. Habischt, would appear to favor another school of thought.
Sie haben mich gefragt, ob ich der Meinung sei, dass eine Beziehung zwischen afrikanischer.
You ask me if I think it would be a good thing to combine native African medicine with the modern medicine of industrialized countries. This is not an easy question to answer, since the problem is a much broader one.
Teilproblem betrifft. Ich bin der Meinung, dass eine Beziehung zwischen den.
I think a relationship between the cultures of Africa and Europe, or rather the developed countries, is both possible and desirable. But in my view, close collaboration between native medicine and scientific medicine is neither possible nor desirable, particularly because we are in fact dealing with 2 different ways of thinking, one highly subjective and the other objective and scientific. If modern medicine has made remarkable progress in recent years, this is because it has begun to think objectively and scientifically, and this will continue to be the case in the future.
Hat ihre ganzen Erfolge der Neuzeit erst dann gehabt, als sie naturwissenschaftlich zu denken begonnen hat, und das wird zweifellos auch in Zukunft so sein.
Albert Schweitzer's hospital village is due to disappear soon. It will be replaced by an ultra-modern hospital. Europeans obviously find it difficult to think of progress in terms other than their own. The University of Dakar, built by the French after Senegal had been granted its independence, one of the largest in Africa. The degree awarded by the medical faculty here is recognized in France. During the colonial era, 3 years were all that were necessary to become an African doctor, with the right to treat the natives. These doctors, although they didn't know Latin and hadn't spent endless years in medical school, were fully competent to deal with everyday illnesses and do minor surgery. The African doctor disappeared with independence. He no longer corresponded with this young nation's idea of its status. The result, a shortage of doctors. Those who did qualify were eager to stay in the towns, where their clientele might include Europeans and members of the new ruling classes, those who could afford to pay. In Senegal, 75% of the doctors and 74% of the pharmacists live and work in the Dakar region. In most African countries, medical services would not exist were it not for technical assistance from abroad. Antoine is doing his draft service as a surgeon, but he has 5 more years of medical school to do before he qualifies. Thanks to the French government's scheme of cooperation with its former colonies, he is acquiring practical experience which he would never have been permitted in France. He is the only surgeon at this hospital. This type of situation, which is fairly common, has caused a great deal of argument. But to be fair to Antoine, he is doing a very good job. Underpaid and overworked, but very devoted to his patients, and he has never had the slightest slip-up. In fact, surgery is much more of a technique than a science. Dexterity and daily practice are more important than theoretical knowledge. Perhaps the European way of doing things is not the only one, and why should not Europe be the one to change? For the simple reason that the European medical establishment is not fond of reappraising its methods, and because an African country wants to resemble a European country, because it doesn't want to give the impression of having a cut-price medical system, a poor man's version. So in the rural areas, a scarcity of medical personnel and hospitals which lack medical supplies, and with temporary foreign assistants in charge of all this. The lines of people waiting to get into African hospitals get longer every year. Statistics show an increase in the number of consultations and the amount of state medical care. For some, this is a sign of progress, whereas for others, it is a proof of an increase in illness as a result of progress. The Europeans are beginning to have their doubts. Is there really a psychological as well as a social aspect to illness, as the Africans contend there is? As a French doctor has said, is illness a form of language, a way of expressing a disharmony with oneself or with one's environment? In Libreville, Gabon, a private clinic, a model of its kind. It is owned by Dr. Chambrier, a Gabonese whose father is French. The clinic, which has better equipment and more staff than the city hospital, is waiting to receive its clients. Clients who can afford it. There's no waiting list for beds. In the meantime, when the hotels in town are full, Dr. Chambrier rents his rooms to travelers at $100 a night. The wives of government officials and members of Gabon's only political party get special rates. Dr. Chambrier's position of authority in this westernized society is based on 3 things. His authority as a medical man based on his qualifications, his powerful vested interests, and his political power. Dr. Chambrier is a member of the sole political party's executive committee and one of the country's leading political personalities. A mosque in Senegal. Religion is another form of authority with immense power in Western Africa. The holy man of this mosque was a famous healer, noted for his treatment of the insane, who walk around the courtyard with their feet encased in a block of wood. The holy man died before he could appoint one of his sons as his successor. To avoid a dispute, the four brothers agreed to assume together the mantle of their late father. They practice as a group and take an equal share of the fees, which are all the higher since there are now four of them. A desire for gain has given birth to another kind of healer, the charlatan. Each of the four brothers, in turn, inscribes a verse of the Koran on a slate. The slate is washed and the water carefully preserved. This murky water is supposed to perform miracles of healing.
What he wrote was a verse from the Koran. It's for a patient who's just arrived from treatment. He's mentally ill. That is the reason why he has prepared this medicine.
Now all that remains to be done is to persuade the patient to drink this holy concoction and convince himself of its healing powers. This kind of quackery bears no relation to traditional African medicine as dispensed by the medicine man. There are 300 students in the pharmacology faculty at Dakar. The majority of them will become pharmacists, that is, retailers of remedies. The forests of Africa, however, contain a profusion of plants with proven medicinal properties. But instead of studying these, which would mean producing drugs at prices which everyone can afford, these students are taught European pharmacology, with the result that the market is swamped by imported drugs. A state-owned hospital in Dakar. To get to see a doctor, you have to be in the line at dawn. It is becoming increasingly costly to maintain such hospitals in the tropics. It is reckoned that to keep one in full working order would require an annual expenditure for maintenance of the building and equipment equivalent to 30% of the total initial capital investment. The administrative machinery is increasingly cumbersome. All the procedures involved come as a great shock to an African used to being accepted as part of a group. To be given the required forms, to avoid too long a wait, and even to gain admission, several palms have to be greased. Corruption is growing at every level. Public health is becoming an increasingly shady business. For those who have come here, their search for health involves getting lost in the labyrinth of an unknown and hermetic world. These actors are people who would generally be regarded as insane. The inmates of the Fan Psychiatric Hospital regularly put on shows for other inmates, to which the local villagers are invited. The hospital staff also takes part, either on the stage or in the audience. This form of psychodrama is not a technique borrowed from modern Western psychotherapy, but a continuing tradition in Africa, where since the earliest times, villagers cast out their devils through the medium of dancing and play acting. The Fan Psychiatric Hospital is not a lunatic asylum. It is a village where the patients never come alone, but always accompanied by at least one member of their family. Accompanied by their relatives, they are free to move about and even go outside the hospital. As in their home village, the inhabitants gather round for their daily palaver, or pinch. Everyone can have his say, the doctor, nursing staff, the patients and their relatives. The patients are neither judged nor rejected. They're not treated as insane. They can all say what they want to say. The patients are given treatment and drugs, but these drugs alone cannot ensure a complete cure. Professor Colombe, Director of Psychiatric Services at Dakar and the initiator of the Fan experiment, tells us why.
On dit souvent, les malades disent souvent, et les familles de malades, voire même les guérisseurs, que à Fan, c'est-à-dire dans cette...
It is often said, the patients often say, their relatives and even the medicine men say, that at Fan, that is in this hospital, we don't provide a complete cure. We calm the patient, we help in the healing process, but for the cure to be complete, it needs the help of a medicine man. In what way can a medicine man help? For the medicine man, mental illness hasn't the same significance, nor the same explanation as for us. It is generally the result of some form of aggression, either aggression from those who live around him, his entourage, or aggression from spirits. In other words, the spirits which represent law, order, and religion.
Il y ait un accord entre le malade, sa famille, et l'agresseur, c'est-à-dire il faut démasquer l'agresseur.
So if the patient is to be completely cured, harmony has to be re-established between the patient, his family, and the aggressor. In other words, if the aggressor is a man, he must be discovered and made to own up. If the aggressor is some form of evil spirit or evil spell, then this devil must be driven out or the spell undone by means of a magic ritual performed on the patient by the medicine man. Or it may be a question of re-establishing harmony between the patient and the law in such cases generally meaning tradition or ancestral authority.
Entre le malade et les autres, entre le malade et la loi.
So what the general practitioner, and in particular the specialist, has failed to understand, the psychiatrist has understood. Here, compared with Europe, the notion of illness takes on an additional dimension. The process of healing involves a further level of treatment because the African is the product of a different society and a different culture. To understand this, one needs only to observe this pinch of mentally deranged women. Before the traditional African environment was destroyed by the European influence, the mentally ill were not confined to an asylum. Since they were not responsible for the aggression which they had suffered, they could not be considered as personally responsible. Professor Colombe also says, if a therapist regards the insane as sick people, then the therapeutic relationship is bad and its whole point is being missed. We condemn the insane to remain insane. We imprison them in their state of insanity. And in Europe, society as a whole rejects the insane in this way, forcing them to remain insane. Kenya, another psychiatric village in the interior. An experiment like the one at Fan, an experiment made urgent and vital by the rapid breakdown of the traditional rural way of life. Nowadays, in the villages, it is becoming less and less common for the sick to remain with their family. If somebody has a fit of madness, the police are called and he is taken away and shut up in a state asylum, which without any exaggeration is more like a prison. Formerly, there were hardly any cases of chronic insanity in Africa, merely fits of madness quickly cured with the help of the medicine man acting as mediator for the group. But today, the group itself is tending to break up. In the towns, the broad family group becomes dispersed and is replaced by the small, Western-style individual family unit. It is a different form of society where each individual is left to his own devices. The group no longer assumes responsibility or takes care of any member who becomes insane. In this village, it's different. Here, everybody helps to calm the insane so that they can be accepted back once again into their social group. Europeans who know and love Africa are making every effort to set up several such villages as rapidly as possible, because the Senegal government has decided to lock up all those who are insane, so as not to tarnish the country's image in the eyes of tourists, who are an increasingly important source of income. Building such huts and purchasing the necessary drugs does not involve a great deal of expense. In most cases, the treatment only lasts 4 to 5 months, and the use of occupational therapy should help to speed up the process of recovery. The patient is free to choose the type of activity he prefers. An old man returns home after 3 months of treatment at Kenya. Why this wooden shackle? Is it for him? No, I think it's one that's been thrown away. The patient has been in our hospital for quite some time, but he may well be back again. The problem now is one of adjustment, getting his family to accept him once again after his long absence. The family council will be the ones to decide whether or not the old man should be accepted back into the family circle, now that he has been cured.
Barna futata jandron ay mo ani mo le son kata wala ani mo ay mo le ntanyan te mol camera ko ala ani mo la dungo nyon.
His wife is somewhat reluctant and states her conditions. Her husband must stop making a spectacle of himself by being the only one in the village to plant rice. His rice was successful, but the neighbors' cows regularly caused havoc in his rice field. Each time this happened, he flew into a fit of rage and went for the owners of the cows. This was why everyone decided he must be mad, because only a madman would think of planting rice in a region where, since time immemorial, cattle have been allowed to roam free. He was therefore excluded from the group, since his behavior was considered a disgrace to his clan. Finally, however, he is taken back for a 3-month trial period. First the colonial powers and then the Western world, by importing their society and their medicine into Africa, have set in motion a process of disintegration which is threatening the physical and mental health of the native African. It is a fact that modern medicine has been responsible for the introduction of surgery and the discovery of effective remedies for certain tropical diseases. However, in the last analysis, the number of lives saved in this way are outnumbered by those lost as a result of exposure to all the diseases which follow in the wake of progress. It is impossible to prevent disease when the population is living in increasingly wretched circumstances, and impossible to combat this disease when the medical system is not designed to cope with such destitution. The progressive uprooting of African society is also destroying the healing powers of African medicine, which is no longer effective when divorced from the traditional environment. Modern scientific medicine's monopoly has meant that native medicine is being driven underground, where it tends to degenerate into quackery. For those who live in shanty towns, there's no way out. These youngsters are suffering from an illness brought about by their inability to adapt to the conditions of a new lifestyle imported from abroad. Their mental illness is an expression of their refusal to accept the values imposed by society, and as such no different from alcoholism, juvenile delinquency, crime or drug addiction, all of which are on the increase. Instinctively, these patients seek relief in dancing, and through dancing seek to regain their mental stability. In this psychiatric clinic, they find care and reassurance, and in all likelihood a cure. But what then? In the outside world, nothing has changed. In the words of Professor Colombe, if the Africans do not succeed in ridding themselves of the idea that the foreign concept of progress is a goal to attain, if they do not succeed in understanding that their development can and should only consist in an evolution of their own social and cultural values, if they do not succeed in making this point of view prevail, then there will be more and more cases of physical and mental illness in Africa.